Hello, everyone. Today, we're diving into a heart-stopping confrontation between a brilliant army major and her husband, a man whose schemes were as cowardly as they were cruel. There are no tears of weakness here, only the cold click of handcuffs, the unyielding grip of justice, and the radiant dawn of freedom after the healing of unseen scars. This is a raw, realistic, and deeply human story about a woman's resurrection. Let's begin. The divorce papers lay dormant in a desk drawer, one corner slightly curled as if mirroring the last frayed edge of Olivia's patience. A month had passed since they'd both signed the agreement to dissolve their 8-year marriage, yet the house maintained a deceptive tranquility. It was a space shared by two strangers, each carving out their own territory in the cramped silence, waiting for the final decree from the court. Mark was still there, a ghost haunting their luxury Arlington condo, as if the fracture had never occurred. He had started playing the part of the remorseful husband, a man jolted awake from a long, selfish dream. But for Olivia, this sudden transformation didn't feel like warmth. It felt like a threat triggering the instincts of a major in the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. It was 1 a.m. when Olivia got home. After a 12-hour stakeout, her shoulders ached, and the faint, acrid smell of cordite still clung to the inside of her nostrils. As the door swung open, the soft yellow light of a pendant lamp in the living room spilled out. Mark was on the sofa, a book in his hand, but his eyes were glued to the door. Seeing her, he shot to his feet, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Olivia, you're finally back. I was so worried your phone went straight to voicemail. I reheated dinner 3 times. Go wash up, I'll get you something hot to eat." Olivia didn't answer. She unlaced her tactical boots and walked straight to the bathroom. The roar of the shower couldn't drown out Mark's voice, drifting from the kitchen, rambling on about how he'd personally cooked her favorite, a complex seafood ciopino he'd found a recipe for online. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from lack of sleep, but her gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. She'd spent her career reading criminals through their micro-expressions. Mark was trying too hard. His enthusiasm was a fresh coat of paint slapped over a wall riddled with rot. In her line of work, when a subject suddenly and drastically changes their patterns without a plausible reason, it's because they're planning something big. Stepping out to the dining table, she sat opposite him. He served her food, his attentiveness so cloying it was almost nauseating. He started reminiscing about their early days 10 years ago, when he was a broke recent graduate waiting in the rain to give her a single wilting rose after her shift. He spoke of vows of how he'd lost his way, consumed by work while neglecting his family. Mark's performance was so convincing, his eyes grew red, his voice cracking as if he were the true victim of his own neglect. "Olivia, can we try again? I know I screwed up, but 10 years of our lives. Are we just going to throw it all away? Your parents are hoping we'll get back together. I visited them yesterday. Your dad's cough sounded bad, so I bought him a top-of-the-line massage chair and some premium supplements. They've already been delivered." Olivia put down her fork. Her eyes, now frozen, locked onto her husband's sanctimonious face. She knew Mark better than anyone. He was a real estate developer, a man who built his career by manipulating clients and partners. His sudden generosity toward her father, a retired and highly influential Army general, wasn't about filial piety. It was an investment. Mark needed the son-in-law of a general credential to secure his upcoming business deals. More importantly, he refused to exit this marriage branded as an adulterer who'd been kicked to the curb. "Did you buy my father a gift? Or did you buy his endorsement?" she asked, her voice so cold it made Mark flinch. He quickly regained his composure, adopting a wounded expression and sighing with theatrical resignation. Silence descended upon the kitchen, punctuated only by the ticking wall clock, counting down the seconds of Olivia's patience. She didn't take another bite. As she stood to clear the dishes, Mark leaped up to stop her, insisting on washing them himself with an air of profound guilt. His eyes darted toward her, a furtive, shifty glance he couldn't hide from a woman who'd spent half her life staring down the most hardened criminals. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. Lying in her own room, she listened to every faint sound from Mark's home office. He was still awake. The soft click of a keyboard, the gentle scrape of a chair, and a whispered murmur so low that only a trained ear would ever detect it. Her investigator's gut told her a play was being staged in her own home and she was the intended prey. The next morning, after Mark had left for work, Olivia began a silent sweep. She didn't rummage like a jealous wife. She processed the scene like a CID agent. Everything in Mark's office was neat, but it was too perfect. She moved to the corner of the room to the sleek, stainless steel trash can that had been emptied that morning. Bending down, she looked closely at the bottom. A tiny piece of plastic was wedged in a seam. Using tweezers, she plucked it out. It wasn't paper. It was the discarded frame of a prepaid SIM card, the kind used for burner phones. Why would a developer whose professional life depended on his official well-known number need an untraceable SIM? And why would he dispose of it so carefully right here in his own house? Olivia stood motionless in the center of the room, the small piece of plastic in her hand, feeling strangely cold. She knew she was right. The feigned kindness, the warm meals, the crocodile tears, it was all a smokescreen for a vile plan already in motion. Her adversary was no longer a criminal on the streets. It was the man who had shared her bed for 8 years. A new case had just begun. But this time, the crime scene was her own life. The plastic frame of the burner SIM lay in Olivia's palm, its sharp edges a perfect metaphor for the man who'd discarded it. A developer like Mark, who prided himself on transparency and reputation, would never touch a burner phone unless he was orchestrating a conspiracy that demanded absolute anonymity. Olivia stood in his office, her eyes scanning every bookshelf, every meticulously organized file. Her CID training kicked in, transforming her home into a crime scene that needed to be deconstructed layer by layer. She was no longer Mark's wife. She was a hunter, and he was her cunning, cornered prey. On Saturday morning, Mark was up earlier than usual. He put on an expensive set of golf attire and spritzed on a cologne with notes of sandalwood, a scent designed to convey stability and trustworthiness. From the balcony, Olivia watched through a crack in the door as he double-checked his clubs in the trunk of his car. He turned suddenly, a brilliant smile spreading across his face when he saw her step out. "You're up. I'm taking your dad to the River Bend Club today. His back has been acting up and I figure some light exercise and fresh air will do him good." Olivia leaned against the doorframe, a faint, humorless smile on her lips. She knew that a prestigious country club wasn't just for exercise. It was a marketplace for backroom deals, a place where whispered conversations were worth millions. Her father, the retired general, still held immense sway and a vast network within the construction and defense contracting industries. Mark was trying to use her father's shadow to muscle his way into a lucrative project his firm was desperate to land. She walked over her slender fingers, expertly adjusting his collar, a calculated gesture of affection. "Have fun with Dad, but make sure he doesn't overdo it. Oh, and you should wear this silver tie clip. It goes perfectly with your outfit." Mark, though surprised, looked triumphant. He stood still as she fastened the clip to his tie, oblivious to the fact that embedded within the elegant piece of jewelry was a sub-miniature listening device, a piece of specialized gear Olivia had signed out from the tech division. Under the pretext of a high-priority case, he gave her a light, dry kiss on the forehead, a gesture thick with the stench of deceit, then turned and left the very picture of a devoted son-in-law. Olivia went back inside, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. She sat on the sofa, opened her laptop, and activated the signal decryption software. The pain wasn't from a broken heart. It was from the disgust of watching Mark use her own parents as pawns in his sordid career game. He was stripping away the last vestiges of dignity from an old man who had lived a life of honor, all to pad his bank account. His kindness over the past month was nothing more than a long-term investment, an elaborate performance designed to paint her as the unfaithful villain, and himself as the tragic victim in her family's eyes. As Mark's car pulled out of the garage, the GPS signal from the tie clip began to move steadily across her screen. She put on her headphones, and the world around her fell silent, leaving only the frantic drumming of her own heart. She remembered their early years when her father had worried that Mark would suffer being married to a CID agent who was never home. It was her father who had mentored Mark, introduced him to his most valuable contacts, and trusted him like a son. Now that son was holding a knife behind his back, waiting for the perfect moment to plunge it into the family's honor. At the golf course through the bug, Olivia heard Mark's obsequious tone with her father. The thwack of clubs hitting balls, the hearty laughter of middle-aged men, and their praise for Mark having such a capable wife. Mark replied in a low, somber voice. "Oh, Olivia's brilliant, of course. She's just very dedicated to her work. It can get lonely sometimes, but I always try to keep the home front secure so she can focus on her duty." The bastard. Olivia clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms. He was planting seeds of doubt, carefully crafting the image of a neglected husband to set the stage for the next phase of his plan. Every word was a calculated strike aimed at the soft spot of an old man's compassion. Her chest tightened, a dull but intense pain spreading through her. She had considered a clean break, an amicable divorce, to preserve some shred of a decent memory. But Mark had chosen to fight dirty. He didn't just want the assets. He wanted to obliterate her life and her reputation. A light rain began to fall, and the signal from the golf course became spotty. But Olivia sat patiently, her eyes fixed on the oscillating sound waves on her screen. She knew Mark wouldn't stop at charming her father. He needed a pretext, irrefutable proof to throw her out of the house without splitting a single asset while simultaneously turning her own parents against her. The cold discipline of an investigator kept her mind clear, but the woman inside her was bleeding. Late that afternoon, Mark drove her father home. Through a hacked traffic camera feed nearby, she watched him gently help the old man out of the car, carrying the gift bag of supplements to the door. The image was picture perfect. If only she hadn't heard the strange sounds coming from the bugged tie clip, moments after Mark got back in the car alone. He didn't head home. He drove to a deserted side street and pulled over. The distinct crackle of a radio signal filled her headphones. A car door opened, and a different male voice, coarse and reeking of cheap cigarettes, spoke next to Mark. Olivia held her breath, cranking the volume. "Everything set. Is Vince ready?" Mark asked, his voice now stripped of its gentle, respectful tone. It was cold, sharp, and lethal. "Don't worry, boss. Got the good stuff imported. Odorless, tasteless. One sip and even a tigress turns into a kitten. Vince is on standby. Just give the word and he'll play his part." Mark's sharp, metallic laugh echoed in her ears. Olivia felt the blood freeze in her veins. Vince. The drug. Play his part. The keywords clicked together into a disgusting scenario she'd never dared to imagine. Mark was planning to stage a scene, catching her in the act. She would be the drugged, unconscious star, and his best friend would be the lover. The static from the bug intensified as if something was now covering the tie clip. Olivia pressed the headphones tighter to her ears. A low, guttural sound came through, cut short, but it was enough to make her go numb. It was Mark's triumphant chuckle, the sound of a man who believed he held a winning hand, ready to send his wife plummeting into an abyss. "Let's see how Major Evans handles this," Mark muttered to himself before starting the car. Olivia took off the headphones. The room was suddenly eerily silent. She looked out the window as twilight devoured the city, just as the darkness in Mark's heart was poised to devour her. But he was mistaken. The best hunter isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who sees the prey's every move before it's even made. This was a battle she could not afford to lose. The sound of Mark's engine roared to life, then faded, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with revulsion. Olivia remained in her chair, headphones clamped to her ears, eyes locked on the screen, displaying sound waves that looked like jagged cuts across the silence. The bug on the tie clip was still transmitting, sending back a raw, unfiltered feed from inside the luxury sedan. After dropping off her father, Mark didn't come home. He drove to a discreet dive bar tucked away in a back alley where his best friend Vince was waiting. Vince was a notorious parasite, a man who lived by latching onto Mark's coattails for money and women. Through the crackling audio, Olivia heard the clinking of ice in a glass, Vince's boorish laughter, and her husband's feigned sigh of exhaustion. "Are you ready, Vince? I don't want any screw-ups that night." Mark's voice cut through, as cold and precise as a butcher sharpening his cleaver. Vince's reply was slick with alcohol and depravity. "Boss, relax. I already booked the suite at the Onyx Hotel. Hidden cameras in place. And I've got the stuff right here. It works fast. 5 minutes, and she'll be as compliant as a doll. All I have to do is unbutton her shirt, lie down next to her, and you'll have a whole album of photos to kick her out with." A cold dread, sharp and electric, shot down Olivia's spine. It wasn't fear. It was absolute disgust for the man she had called her husband for 8 years. An image of Mark flashed in her mind, the man who always appeared in public impeccably dressed with a polite smile for everyone. That same man was now huddled in a dark corner, plotting to humiliate his wife in the most despicable way imaginable. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to destroy the honor of a U.S. Army major, to turn her into a stain on her own life, so he could walk away as the victim sees all their joint assets and maintain his coveted image as the general's son-in-law. Mark continued his instructions, his voice low but menacing. "Remember, you have to make it look real. I'll bring my new girlfriend along as a witness. I'll play the devastated husband who walks in on his wife and his best friend. If this works, I'll cut you in on the deal I'm making with my father-in-law's contacts. You'll be set for a year." Vince cackled, a gurgling sound in his throat like a demon cheering. "You're a genius, boss. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Get rid of the frigid wife and keep your seat at the big table. I'm impressed." Olivia clenched her fist, her nails drawing blood, but she felt no pain. The revulsion had overwhelmed every other sensation. She had thought, after years of dealing with the criminal underworld, that she had seen the depths of human cruelty. But the most terrifying cruelty of all was festering right beside her in her own bed. He saw marriage as a business deal and his wife as an asset to be liquidated when she was no longer useful. The pain of betrayal had long since hardened into a scar, but the disgust at Mark's cheap, rotten character was a tidal wave. A man who would use drugs to frame his own wife, a man who would manipulate an old man for profit, such a creature no longer deserved to be treated as human. The clink of glasses again. The sordid deal was sealed. Mark began to meticulously review the schedule. Every timeline, every movement laid out like a battle plan. Olivia jotted it all down in a small notebook, her hand steady and swift. The Onyx Hotel. Rohypnol. Staged scene. She underlined each keyword. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a criminal conspiracy. She was the victim and the perpetrator held the keys to her home. Mark and Vince left the bar. The bug transmitted the sound of the wind whistling past the car window as Mark drove off. Olivia sat silently in her dark office, the glow of the monitor illuminating her stone-cold face. She remembered all the times she'd been away on assignment, how Mark would call his voice, filled with concern, reminding her to eat and stay warm. All of it had been a calculated performance, a way to build his image as the perfect husband to make his eventual accusations more credible. His hypocrisy was so vast it was chilling. The car radio came on a soft love song playing like a cruel joke. Mark hummed along, clearly elated by his plan. He stopped at a red light, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, then picked up his phone. He was calling the woman Olivia assumed was Jessica, the young mistress he was keeping. "Hey, babe. Pick out a gorgeous dress. Friday night we've got a big show to watch. After that, I'll be completely free for you. No one will ever stand in our way again." Jessica's high-pitched, cooing voice came through the speaker, dripping with ambition. Olivia closed her eyes, overcome by a wave of exhaustion, but the soldier in her immediately suppressed it. There was no time for grief or hate. The enemy had revealed himself, the weapons were chosen, and the battlefield was set. She would show Mark that trying to entrap a seasoned CID investigator was the biggest and last mistake of his life. Mark hung up and started driving toward their condo. Olivia quickly shut down her laptop and put everything away. She walked into the living room and poured a glass of ice water, downing it to cool the fire in her gut. The key turned in the lock. Mark walked in wearing the same fake-tired expression of a man who had just spent the day taking care of his father-in-law. He saw Olivia and froze for a second before manufacturing a warm smile. "You're still up, waiting for me. Your dad had a great time today. He couldn't stop praising you. Made me feel proud." Olivia looked straight into his eyes, her investigator's gaze trying to burn through his mask. She replied in a flat, emotionless tone, "I wasn't waiting. Just thinking about a complicated case. You should take a shower. You reek of alcohol and cigarettes." Mark started instinctively sniffing his shirt before quickly escaping to the bathroom. Olivia watched his long shadow on the floor, contempt rising in her throat. She knew Friday night would be the end of everything. Mark was confident he was the director of this play, but he had no idea that, as of this moment, the script was now in her hands. Before closing the bathroom door, he turned back a triumphant glint in his eyes, disguised as casual concern. He said the words he thought would seal his victory, but to Olivia, they were the death knell of his career and his character. "This Friday, I have a meeting with an important partner at the Onyx Hotel. He wants to meet you too to discuss the General's project. Try to make time, okay? We don't want to disappoint your father." Olivia smiled, a smile as sharp as a dagger. Her voice was even but heavy with intent. "Of course. I'll be there. I'm very much looking forward to seeing just how talented your partner is." Mark nodded, satisfied, and shut the door. Olivia stood alone in the living room. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting her solitary figure in a steely, unshakable light. Friday night at the Onyx Hotel. It wasn't just where Mark planned to bury her honor. It was where she would dig his grave. The stage was set, and the Major was ready for her counteroffensive. The darkness in the living room was broken only by the sound of the shower and the cold, steady beat of Olivia's heart. She wouldn't allow herself to wallow in the melodrama of a betrayed wife. In the world of criminal investigation, emotion was a liability that led to fatal errors. Olivia went to her room, opened a hidden drawer, and took out a handheld GPS tracker and a professional-grade telephoto lens. She needed to see the face of the woman who would collude with Mark to destroy her. The woman he called Babe with such sickeningly sweet affection. Finding information on Jessica wasn't difficult for a seasoned major. 24 years old, a sales associate under Mark's supervision. A rose with sharp thorns and even sharper ambition, eager to trade her beauty for a meteoric rise up the corporate ladder. The next morning, Olivia took a personal day. She swapped her crisp uniform for dark, nondescript athletic wear, a baseball cap pulled low over her face and sunglasses. She became a ghost in the bustling D.C. traffic. She waited patiently on a street corner a block away from Mark's office building. At exactly 11 a.m., his luxury sedan emerged from the parking garage. He wasn't alone. In the passenger seat sat a young woman with flowing curled hair, her dress clinging to every youthful curve. It was Jessica. Olivia started her old, untraceable motorcycle, keeping a safe distance, close enough to not lose him, but far enough to not arouse the suspicion of a paranoid man like Mark. He drove through several major streets before turning into a quiet residential area home to discreet hourly rate hotels hidden behind rows of trees. The car stopped in front of a boutique hotel called Lavender Inn. Mark got out and gallantly opened the door for Jessica. She cooed, linking her arm through her shrill laughter, cutting through the humid summer air. Olivia parked across the street and slipped into a coffee shop, choosing a table on the second floor with a direct view of the hotel entrance. She raised her camera, focusing the lens on Jessica's radiant face and Mark's victorious expression. The shutter clicked dry and precise. In the frame, Jessica was playfully adjusting Mark's tie, the very tie clip that held Olivia's listening device. The irony was so bitter it made Olivia's chest ache. She was documenting her own husband's infidelity with the very person who would help drug her on Friday night. Through the lens, Olivia studied Jessica's face. She was young, beautiful, and vibrant, but her sparkling eyes held a cold, calculating glint. Olivia was suddenly reminded of herself 10 years ago, when she too had naively believed Mark's vows, believing he was her safe harbor. She saw a young woman full of hope, willing to sacrifice date nights for duty, willing to stay up all night making soup for a tired husband. Jessica was just like her, then drunk on promises of a wealthy future and a legitimate title after the old boring wife was out of the picture. But Olivia knew better now. A man who could plot the destruction of his loyal wife would just as easily discard a mistress for a more profitable opportunity. The fleeting pity vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. Jessica was not innocent. She knew Mark was married, knew about his connection to the general, and was an active participant in the plan to drug and frame Olivia. This wasn't love. It was a conspiracy of rotten souls. Olivia put the camera away, her eyes narrowing dangerously. She could release these photos now, humiliate Mark in front of his company and family. But that would be too easy. A true investigator doesn't arrest a criminal at the first sign of intent. She waits until the act is committed, when the evidence is undeniable and the punishment is total, irreversible collapse. 2 hours later, Mark and Jessica emerged from the hotel. He tenderly brushed a stray hair from her face and gave her a passionate kiss before she got into her own car. Olivia remained at her table still as a statue. She pulled out her phone and accessed Mark's bank account, for which she had cracked the password the night before. Large charges for jewelry and designer handbags stared back at her. Mark was using their family's money she had worked so hard to save, to fuel the ambitions of them both. When Olivia got home, Mark was already there watching TV, as if he hadn't just spent the afternoon in a cheap hotel. Seeing her, he looked up. "Where have you been? You look exhausted." "Rough day at work. Let me get you a glass of juice." Olivia looked at the man playing the role of the model husband. The image of him embracing Jessica still burned into her mind. The disgust made her want to smash the camera in his face, but reason stayed her hand. She smiled a smile so faint it was chilling. "Thanks. Just a headache. How are the preparations for Friday night coming along?" "I've picked out the perfect outfit for the occasion." Mark's face lit up, completely missing the double meaning. He believed Olivia was still completely fooled by his facade. "I've booked the table and a suite at the hotel. Jessica and Vince will be there too. I want you to get to know my colleagues better. We might need their help down the line." Olivia nodded and walked into her bedroom. She opened her laptop and began processing the photos. She wouldn't use them for a typical confrontation. These images would be combined with the video from the Onyx Hotel to deliver the final fatal blow, a strike that would decimate Mark's career and character in front of his board of directors, and most importantly, her father. She would let Mark play his part until the very end, let him believe he had won, and then push him off the cliff of his own making into an abyss of shame. That night, lying next to him but facing away, Olivia felt a strange calm. The tears were gone, the pain was gone. All that remained was a singular mission to execute justice her way. Mark was likely dreaming of his new life with Jessica, never knowing that his every breath was under the surveillance of a major from CID. Olivia smiled bitterly in the darkness, her breathing, even as if in deep sleep, but her mind was wide awake, fitting the final pieces of her counterattack into place. Let's see who the better actor was on this stage of life, the slick developer or the seasoned investigator. The golden light from crystal chandeliers in the upscale restaurant cast a faux warm glow on the marble tabletops. Olivia sat poised in a sophisticated black dress, her makeup understated, but her eyes held the piercing gaze of an agent surveying a crime scene. Across from her was Jessica the mistress in a vibrant, provocative red dress. Beside Jessica sat Vince, his thuggish features crammed uncomfortably into an ill-fitting suit. Mark sat close to Olivia, his left hand resting casually on the back of her chair, a fraudulent display of possession for his friends and lover. "Olivia, I'd like you to meet Vince, my best friend from college. And this is Jessica, my right-hand woman at the firm." Mark announced, his tone jovial, as if this were a genuine family gathering. "No business tonight, just friends." Olivia offered a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, nodding at the two people colluding with her husband to destroy her. Her training made her notice every detail. Vince's hand periodically touching his breast pocket, likely where the vial of Rohypnol was hidden. Jessica's shifty glances at Mark, and especially her husband's unusual eagerness to order the strongest cocktails. Good wine needs good company. "I'm so happy my wife, the Major, could spare some of her precious time to be here. Let's toast to that." Mark poured Olivia a full glass of red wine, his eyes glinting strangely in the candlelight. Olivia raised her glass. She smelled the rich aroma of fermented grapes, but underneath it she sensed the stench of betrayal. She brought the glass to her lips, took a tiny performative sip, and then while the others were distracted by one of Vince's crude jokes, she deftly used her napkin to absorb the liquid from the glass. The movement was instantaneous, precise, and silent, a technical skill honed through years of interrogation room practice. The dinner proceeded with a string of empty compliments. Mark constantly placed food on Olivia's plate, his doting husband act so over the top that Jessica couldn't hide her occasional flashes of jealousy. Olivia watched it all her heart, a block of ice. It was almost laughable. The man beside her thought he was a brilliant director, guiding his masterpiece to its climax, but he was just a puppet, exposing all his strings to a master investigator. Every subtle gesture, the way he checked his watch, the secret wink he gave Vince was logged in her memory as hard evidence. "Mark, you dote on Olivia so much. You're the ideal husband everyone at the office admires. Olivia must be so happy to have kept you for 10 years, Jessica purred, her voice dripping with sarcasm and ambition. Olivia looked directly into Jessica's eyes. Her deep, dark gaze made the younger woman flinch and look away. "Happiness isn't about what others see, Jessica. It's about whether you can face the truth." Olivia's reply hung in the air, freezing the conversation. Mark laughed nervously to break the tension and immediately refilled the glasses this time, with a brightly colored cocktail he claimed was the restaurant's specialty. Olivia continued her act. She pretended to drink, but secretly poured most of it into the decorative vase on the table while Mark was talking to Vince. Then she began to play the part of a drunk woman, her eyes growing heavy, her head lolling toward Mark's shoulder. "I think this one's a bit strong, Mark. I feel dizzy," she whispered, her voice weak. Mark's face showed a flicker of triumph. His hand squeezed her shoulder, a cruel gesture hidden behind a facade of concern. "You've been working too hard. Here, have some water to clear your head. I'll go get it for you." He stood up, but not to get water. His phone was vibrating. He pulled it out, his expression shifting to one of manufactured urgency. He signaled to Vince and Jessica, then looked at Olivia with a veiled, venomous glance. "Sorry, everyone. It's the partner for the General's project. I have to take this. Vince, keep an eye on her for me. I'll be right back." Mark walked quickly out of the dining area. His hurried exit was the signal. The disgusting play he had so painstakingly orchestrated was about to begin. Olivia remained in her seat, her head resting on the chair back, her breathing even as if she were succumbing to the alcohol. But beneath her closed eyelids, she was counting down the seconds. The stage was set, the supporting actors were in position, and it was time for the Major to start her own game. The moment Mark's back disappeared behind the soundproof glass doors of the lobby, the atmosphere at the table grew strangely tense. Olivia remained still, head tilted, eyes closed, as if the alcohol had completely overpowered the will of a U.S. Army major. But in reality, every one of her senses was on high alert, absorbing the slightest change in the two people opposite her. Vince and Jessica exchanged a look, a glance filled with malicious intent and undisguised triumph. Vince reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unlabeled glass vial. His coarse hands trembled with excitement as he poured the clear, colorless liquid into the glass of water placed directly in front of Olivia. Looks like Major Evans can't hold her liquor after all, Jessica sneered, leaning forward to check if the prey had truly fallen into the trap. Vince snickered. He stirred the water gently with a spoon to dissolve the drug, then pushed the glass closer to Olivia's hand. Just then, a waiter passing by dropped a fork which clattered onto the floor right next to Jessica's feet. Instinctively, she looked down. Vince, too, was distracted by the metallic sound. 3 seconds. That's all a CID special agent needs to turn the tide of an entire operation. Without opening her eyes, Olivia's hands moved with the speed and silence of a phantom. In a fluid, practiced motion, she swapped the glasses. She pushed her own pure glass of water into Jessica's spot and pulled Jessica's drugged one to her. Then, with another lightning-fast diagonal push, she placed the poisoned glass exactly where Jessica's had been. The entire process was seamless, without a single sound or a drop of water spilled. By the time Jessica looked up and Vince turned his attention back to the table, everything was exactly as it had been, at least to the eyes of 2 amateurs fumbling with their crime. Olivia's heart was as cold as an iceberg. There was no fear, no sorrow, not a shred of sentimentality left for her 8-year marriage. Mark's betrayal had crossed the line from a marital rift into an act of attempted character assassination. Looking at the glass of pure malice now sitting in front of Jessica, Olivia felt a steely sense of satisfaction. Those who wish to destroy others with poison deserve to taste it themselves. She would show no mercy. In this battle for survival, kindness to the wicked is a crime against oneself. Mark returned to the table, his face a mask of false urgency. He put his phone away, glanced at Olivia's water glass, and gave Vince a subtle nod. He sat down his hand on her shoulder and pretended to shake her gently. "Olivia, wake up. Drink some water to sober up and I'll take you home." Olivia stirred. She picked up the glass of water, which had been Jessica's and was now clean, took a small sip, and slumped down again. Mark smiled, a smile of sickening satisfaction. He turned to Jessica, his voice turning disgustingly sweet. "You should have some water too, Jessica. You must be thirsty. Drink up, you'll need to help me get her home in a bit." Jessica, suspecting nothing, picked up the glass now containing the very drug her accomplice had just put in it. The candlelight shimmered on the clear water, completely concealing the poison within. She drained it in one go, her flirtatious eyes on Mark as if reminding him of his promised reward after the show was over. Mark watched her drink, his eyes blazing with absolute victory. He believed that in a few short minutes both his wife and his mistress would be completely under his control, making him the supreme king of this twisted game. The room fell strangely quiet. The restaurant's instrumental music played on, but to Olivia it sounded like a funeral dirge for souls already rotted from within. She could hear Jessica's breathing becoming heavier. Her eyes started to glaze over. Mark was still rambling on about some future project, completely unaware that his ace in the hole had been switched, and the ones truly falling into the trap were his most trusted accomplices. The candlelight on the table began to waver in Jessica's vision. She raised a hand to her forehead, blinking repeatedly, trying to clear the fog that was rolling in. The drug Vince had procured was potent. It didn't knock the victim out instantly, but slowly drained their strength, turning them into a soulless puppet. Within minutes, Olivia, watching from beneath her lowered lashes, observed the clinical symptoms: pupils slightly dilated, breathing first rapid, then shallow and clumsy hands, dropping a silver spoon with a loud clatter. The script had been flipped, and now it was Olivia's turn to act. She let her body go limp, her head falling onto the cold marble tabletop just as Jessica began to mumble incoherently. The silence from the 2 women made the table tense, but in Mark's eyes it was the signal of a glorious victory. He shot Vince a vile wink, then immediately switched his expression to one of panicked concern for a devoted husband. Olivia, what's wrong, Vince? I think she's had way too much to drink." "Jessica too, what's happening to them?" Mark yelled, his voice laced with fake alarm to deflect the attention of nearby diners. Vince quickly joined the act, jumping up to steady Jessica, who was slumping in her chair. "Must be the cocktails. I'll get Jessica to the car first." "You get Olivia! Hurry before people start staring." Olivia felt Mark's hands on her, a repulsive jolt running down her spine. These were the same hands that had caressed his mistress that afternoon, that had prepared poison for his wife, and were now pretending to handle her with care. The investigator in her screamed, every muscle in her arm twitching with the urge to execute a perfect shoulder throw and pin this despicable man to the ground. But she clenched her teeth, breathing deeply to keep her body completely relaxed, to play the part of someone who had lost all consciousness. To catch a fox, the hunter must be patient enough to see its final trap. Mark hoisted Olivia up his arm, wrapping around her waist, pulling her close. His cologne mixed with the stench of his lies made her stomach turn. He half dragged her out of the restaurant, his steps hurried but firm. In the parking lot, he shoved her into the back seat like a sack of potatoes with none of the gentleness he had just feigned. Vince had already bundled Jessica into the other car. The two vehicles left the restaurant in tandem, speeding through the night toward the suburbs where the Onyx Hotel and its deadly trap awaited. Inside the car, Mark's true nature emerged. There were no more concerned whispers of Olivia. Instead, he muttered a stream of hateful curses. He glanced in the rearview mirror at her motionless form, his lips twisting into a cruel smirk. 10 years you've been suffocating me, Major. Tonight I'll show you the price for being a cold, powerful wife. Your father will see just how depraved his precious daughter is lying in bed with Vince. Then the house, the money, it'll all be mine. Olivia lay there listening to every venomous word. Her heart felt like stone. 10 years of her life, and in his eyes it was all just a calculated endurance test. He hated her for being successful, hated her for being the daughter of a powerful man he had to bow to. The inferiority complex of a small man had festered into the ambition of a monster. She silently committed his every word to memory. They would be the most damning psychological evidence against him later. The car pulled into the driveway of the Onyx Hotel, a discreet establishment catering to secret affairs and shady deals. Mark and Vince moved with the practiced coordination of professional criminals. They didn't call for a bellhop, instead carrying the two women into the elevator themselves. Mark had booked a luxury suite on the top floor, ensuring absolute privacy. The suite door beeped open. Mark threw Olivia onto the large bed in the center of the room. The dim lighting from the nightstand lamps gave the space a ghoulish feel. Vince followed with Jessica, looking confused now that his part of the plan, Jessica acting as a witness, was also unconscious. Mark didn't care about Jessica. He was busy pulling a digital camera and a few cheap props from a bag preparing to stage his scene. Hurry up, Vince, take her shirt off and get in bed next to her. I'll shoot from this angle. Make it look passionate, you hear me? The more humiliating the better, Mark ordered, his voice trembling with excitement. Olivia felt Vince's breath as he approached the bed. This was the final line. She would not let the filthy hands of this man touch her. Every sense in her body was coiled, ready to spring. She just needed Mark to turn his back to set up the camera. That would be the moment the curtain fell on their pathetic little play. Mark stepped back toward the door, trying to find the best angle. He hit a switch on the wall, dimming the main lights, plunging the room into a lurid, reddish glow. He took a deep breath, his face contorted with the supreme triumph of a man who believes he has already won. Goodbye to this marriage, my dear wife, Mark whispered, his tone utterly depraved. He backed up toward the door, his hand on the knob, ready to burst in and catch them after Vince was in position. Click. The sound of the deadbolt locking. The hotel room door shut, sealing them off from the world. In the suffocating silence, only the predator and the executioner remained. And then Olivia's eyes snapped open, as sharp and cold as a blade drawn in the dead of night. The dry click of the hotel room deadbolt echoed in the silence, signaling their complete isolation. In the dim, lurid glow of the bedside lamps, Mark took a deep, shuddering breath, his face twisted with a sick, ecstatic thrill. He turned to Vince, who was standing awkwardly by the bed, and jutted his chin toward Olivia. What are you waiting for? Straighten her out in the middle of the bed, unbutton her shirt. Make it look like you two just finished a passionate round. Vince licked his lips, his lecherous eyes raking over Olivia's still form. He reached out a grimy hand, but Mark slapped it away. I'll do it. You just take off your shirt and get under the covers with her. And don't you dare try anything. I need clean pictures to get her out of my life. Got it, Mark leaned over Olivia, his trembling fingers fumbling with the buttons of her blouse. He crudely ripped open the top two, exposing the pale skin of her collarbone. His breath, hot and reeking of cigarettes and deceit, washed over her face. He shifted her body and then shoved Vince into place beside her. Vince tossed his suit jacket aside and began clumsily undoing his tie, muttering a stream of vulgar jokes. Mark backed away, pulling a digital camera from his bag and adjusting the focus. He wanted the shot to be perfect to capture the face of the sleeping Major next to his degenerate friend. He turned his back to the bed and walked toward the vanity to grab a small spotlight he'd brought to enhance the visual effect of his staged scene. The instant Mark turned away, a terrifying change occurred on the bed. Olivia's eyes flew open. There was no trace of drowsiness, no sign of having been drugged. Her gaze was as sharp and cold as a frozen lake. She moved, rising from the bed with the fluid silence of a wraith. Without standing up fully, she delivered a swift, precise strike to a nerve cluster at the base of Vince's neck as he was fumbling with his belt buckle. Vince collapsed without a sound, crumpling like a discarded puppet. Olivia swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet making no noise on the thick carpet. She stood directly behind Mark, less than a foot away. In the vanity mirror, Mark was still fiddling with the camera's battery. He was muttering to himself about the fortune that would soon be his. Olivia's composure was chilling. To her, this was no longer a hotel room. It was a crime scene. Mark was not her husband. He was a perpetrator. Her professional protocols took over cold and exact. Mark glanced up at the mirror. At first, he saw only his own reflection. Then a tall, silent shadow materialized behind his shoulder. His heart stopped. He froze the air, catching in his throat. In the mirror, Olivia stood with her arms crossed, a humorless smile playing on her lips. Her eyes bored through the glass straight into his rotten soul. Slowly, Mark turned around. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The camera nearly slipped from his grasp. He looked from Olivia to Vince's unconscious form on the bed, and beads of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Olivia! How? You're awake! The drug! It was… Olivia took a step forward, forcing Mark back against the vanity. She calmly reached out and rebuttoned the 2 buttons he had so violently torn open. The action was slow, deliberate, and menacing. Looking for this? Too bad. It's currently working its way through your little girlfriend's system next door. Did you really think the skills of a real estate developer could outsmart a CID major who's gone up against international drug cartels? Mark trembled. He opened his mouth to scream, but Olivia's hand shot out her fingers, clamping around his jaw with a grip so powerful he thought the bone would shatter. She leaned in, close her breath, even her words like razors. The pain in her heart had forged itself into a will of steel. She saw the raw cowardice in his bulging eyes. This was the man who had vowed to love her, now reduced to a cornered animal. Don't waste your breath, Mark. The door is locked. Vince is out cold. And that hidden camera of yours, I took care of it before you even turned it on. Mark's eyes darted to the corner of the ceiling where he had hidden the spy cam. It was now just a useless black dot. His legs gave out and he crumpled to the floor. All his earlier triumph evaporated, replaced by abject terror. Olivia straightened up and pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket, the device that had captured every one of his vile confessions in the car and in this very room. Your play was very elaborate, but the director was an amateur. You wanted to ruin my reputation, humiliate my father, and steal everything we built together with my sweat, and yes, my blood. Mark tried to speak to beg, but Olivia's icy stare silenced him. She had no need for his fake remorse. She needed justice absolute and crushing. She walked over to his camera, picked it up, and popped out the memory card. Then right in front of him, she snapped it in two. You know, the most disgusting part of all this wasn't the affair. It was that you dared to use my parents as a shield for your own depravity. Tonight, I'm going to teach you what happens when you betray an investigator. Olivia looked at the wreckage of her marriage manifested in this single hotel room. She felt a grim satisfaction that not a single tear had been shed for the creature before her. Mark started to crawl toward her to grab at her legs, but she stepped back, recoiling as if from filth. The show is just getting started, Mark, her voice echoed in the silent room, dry and full of power. Mark looked up at the woman who was once his wife, now standing over him like a supreme judge, ready to bring down the most terrible punishment imaginable. The night was still young, and for Mark it was going to be the longest of his life. Mark shrank back, his eyes wide, with a terror that went beyond simple fear. He saw a ghost, a vengeful spirit where his wife had once been. His developer's confidence shattered. He scrambled for an escape, his mouth opening in a desperate silent scream to summon help. But the reaction time of a CID major is measured in fractions of a second. Before any sound could escape, Olivia lunged. Her hand clamped over his mouth while her left leg swept his feet out from under him. He hit the carpeted floor with a muffled thud. In one fluid motion, she twisted his right arm behind his back at an angle that sent a jolt of agony through him, silencing any further attempts to make a sound. Olivia, A gasp of pain cut him off as she drove her knee into his ribs, applying a control hold. These were the skills she had honed over thousands of hours of training, never imagining she would use them on her husband. But tonight, they were instruments of a very personal justice. She showed no restraint. Every time Mark struggled, she increased the pressure on his shoulder joint, eliciting a dry, cracking sound. "Shut up," she whispered in his ear, her voice so cold it made his skin crawl. "Did you think I would let you continue this pathetic little drama?" From a bag she had brought, she produced a silk scarf, balled it up, and shoved it into his mouth, effectively gagging him. Her eyes were no longer those of a wife. They were the focused, clinical eyes of an agent securing a hostile subject. From under the bed, she pulled a coil of professional-grade zip-tie restraints she had prepared. With practiced efficiency, she hauled Mark up and forced him into a heavy wooden chair in the darkest corner of the room. She secured his hands and feet to the chair's frame with restraints that would only tighten with every struggle. All he could do was make muffled, guttural sounds, his eyes wild with pain and fury fixed on her. When she was done, Olivia stood back, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Her eyes swept the room, a grim sense of satisfaction spreading through her. This was the control he had stolen from her for 8 years through his web of lies. In this suffocating room, she could finally breathe the air of justice. She was no longer the cheated wife, the victim of a vile setup. She was Major Olivia Evans, and she held the fate of her tormentor in her hands. Looking at Mark, crumpled and defeated, she found him pathetic. Where was the dapper developer? The silver-tongued manipulator? Stripped of his expensive suit and arrogant facade, he was just another cowardly criminal. Olivia walked to the bed where Vince lay unconscious. She dragged him to the center and ripped his shirt off, tossing it aside. Your plan was for him to be lying here, wasn't it? Let me help you make the scene a little more authentic, she said conversationally, as if discussing a case report. She went to the adjoining room where Jessica was still passed out from the drug she had willingly consumed. Effortlessly, Olivia half-carried, half-dragged Jessica's limp body into the main suite. She placed Jessica next to Vince, arranging their limbs to mimic the aftermath of a sordid tryst. She pulled a thin sheet over them, leaving just enough exposed to be suggestive. Under the dim lights, the scene was perfect, the best friend and the young mistress entangled in a hotel bed while the mastermind husband watched bound and helpless from the shadows. Olivia took Mark's camera, set it up on a nearby table, and aimed the lens at the bed, ready to capture the moment of their awakening. She surveyed her work, feeling a strange sense of peace. She felt nothing for Jessica or Vince. They were just pawns in Mark's game. The true villain was right there, forced to witness the catastrophic reversal of a fate he thought he controlled. Olivia pulled up a chair and sat opposite Mark. She poured herself a glass of water, taking a small sip. What do you think of the scene? Very realistic, isn't it? You wanted to catch someone cheating, so I'm giving you a scene for the ages. Only the people in bed aren't who you planned. Mark glared at her, tears of pain and rage streaming down his face. He knew in that moment that his life was over. Olivia checked her watch. 6 hours until dawn. 6 hours for her to savor the complete and utter collapse of a fraudulent man. She felt proud of herself, not for her combat skills, but for keeping a cool head, for not succumbing to a blind rage. She was closing a case, the most important case of her life. She adjusted Jessica's position, moving her closer to Vince, so his arm was draped over her waist. The pose would be irrefutable evidence. She smiled, a chilling flash of white in the darkness. Sleep well, my actors. In the morning, the stage lights come up, and the audience will get to see the true face of the devoted son-in-law. She stood and walked to the balcony, looking down at the sleeping city. She knew that after this night, her life would begin anew, cleaner, freer, and entirely her own. The hotel room was a tomb of silent dread, the only light a cold blue glow from the A.C. unit casting eerie shadows on Mark's face. He continued to struggle futilely, the veins in his neck bulging, his bloodshot eyes burning with a murderous hatred. Olivia sat opposite him, her posture relaxed, her hands clasped over one knee, the calm, intimidating presence of an interrogator who already had a signed confession. Still don't get it, do you, Mark? Stop struggling. The more you fight, the deeper those ties will cut, she said, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone that carried in suffocating weight. She stared into his frantic eyes and began to recite his crimes with chilling precision. The burner sim wrapper in the trash. The golf outings used to poison her father's mind against her. The meeting at the dive bar to plot her drugging. She laid it all out in such detail that Mark began to tremble, a horror so profound it eclipsed his physical pain. He couldn't believe that his every move, his every word had been under her microscope for the past month. Did you think I was a fool, Mark? For 8 years, did you think my job made me blind to the rot in my own home? You were wrong. It's because I'm an investigator that I had the patience to let you perform your entire disgusting play. Olivia stood and picked up Mark's phone, using his fingerprint to unlock it. The screen lit up with Jessica's fawning messages and Vince's crude jokes. Olivia calmly navigated to the group chats he shared with colleagues and mutual friends. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, composing a confession in Mark's name. I'm so sorry, everyone. I was wrong to carry on an affair with Jessica behind my wife's back. Vince and I are at the Onyx Hotel. I feel so guilty for what I tried to do to Olivia. She hit send to the most influential people in his professional circle and to the company's HR department. The cascade of notification chimes sounded like a firing squad for the career Mark had so carefully built. Mark made strangled pleading noises, sweat and tears plastering his hair to his face. He shook his head wildly, but it was useless. Don't look at me like that. You chose this hotel as the grave for my honor. Now it will be the grave for everything you have. Olivia looked over at the two figures on the bed. In the quiet of the long night, flashes of their 8 years together flickered through her mind. Their wedding day, when he swore to be her rock. The late nights he'd waited up for her. The worried calls when she was on dangerous assignments. Had any of it been real? Or was it all a calculated investment, using her father's reputation as a ladder to his own success? The answer no longer mattered. Her love for him was like a building that had its foundation secretly eroded. It looked solid, but the slightest tremor brought it crashing down. Tonight it had been razed to the ground. She felt a clean emptiness, no more anger, no more regret, just the final task of processing the scene. Time crawled. Mark had stopped struggling, slumping in the chair like a discarded rag. Olivia sat in the darkness, a silent sentinel watching over her prey. She didn't sleep. The discipline of a soldier kept her mind sharp. Through a gap in the curtains, she saw the city lights indifferent to the life-altering drama unfolding in this room. One life was being dismantled so another could be reborn. My parents treated you like a son. My father staked his lifelong reputation on your business deals, and you were going to repay him by turning his daughter into an adulteress. You're not just despicable, Mark. You are a traitor. Her words cut through the dark. She didn't need an answer. She just needed him to hear it, to have the shame seared into his very bones before sunrise. She went into the bathroom, soaked a washcloth in cold water, and came back to wipe her face. The clarity was invigorating. She double-checked the recorder and the camera. Everything was ready for the morning's explosion. Mark looked at her, his eyes now pleading. He wanted to kneel to blame Jessica, to appeal to their shared history, but the gag silenced his final pathetic lies. Olivia looked up. The longest night of her life was finally ending. It's over, Mark. From this moment on, you are not my husband. You are not my father's son-in-law. You are a stain that I am about to wipe clean the second I walk out that door. She stood by the window as the first hint of dawn, a soft pink line broke through the darkness. The first rays of sunlight pierced the gloom of the hotel room, illuminating the chaotic scene on the bed and the pathetic man huddled in the corner. Olivia turned to face the light, her eyes bright with an unshakable resolve. A new day was dawning, and Mark's play was about to have its horrifying sunlit finale. The harsh morning light streamed through the curtains, illuminating the sordid scene. Olivia stood by the window, her shadow long and imposing. On the bed, Vince stirred first, groaning as he clutched his head. When his blurry vision cleared, and he saw himself naked from the waist up next to an equally disheveled Jessica, with Olivia standing over them like an avenging angel, he jolted upright, his face draining of all color. What the hell, Major, he stammered, grabbing for the sheet. Jessica began to wake, still groggy. But when she saw Olivia's stone-cold expression and the foul-smelling Vince beside her, she let out a piercing shriek and scrambled to the far corner of the bed. Olivia said nothing. She walked to the corner and, with a small knife from her bag, cut the restraints binding Mark. The gag came out. Numb and weak, he collapsed to the floor. Seeing his lover and his best friend in a state of utter humiliation, and the lens of a camera in Olivia's hand pointed directly at him, he knew every escape route was sealed. He crawled on his hands and knees to her, grabbing at her pants, his face a mess of tears and snot. Olivia, I'm begging you. They manipulated me. I was wrong. Please just give me one more chance. Don't send that video. Your father will kill me. Olivia stepped back, disgusted by his touch. Contempt rose in her throat. She looked at him as if he were an insect. 8 years of marriage, 10 years of her life, all for this sniveling coward. She didn't feel triumph, only a profound disgust for her own past blindness. You think you have the right to mention my father, a man who planned to drug his wife and stage a scene to steal her assets, dares to ask for a second chance. Her voice was hard as flint. She pulled a file from her bag. It was a new ironclad divorce agreement she had prepared overnight. She threw it onto the messy bed. Sign it. You walk away with nothing. The condo, the car, all our joint savings, they're mine. Consider it a cheap price to pay for me not to send this video, and the audio of your confession to the police and your company's board of directors. Mark stared at the papers, his eyes vacant. To walk away with nothing meant losing everything he had built, losing the foundation that came from his marriage. But one look at Olivia's merciless eyes told him he had no room to negotiate. Vince and Jessica sat on the bed paralyzed with shame, knowing they were just collateral damage in a war they had already lost. Hurry up! My patience is measured in seconds, Olivia's voice cut like a razor. Trembling Mark signed the document, each stroke of the pen a new brand of humiliation. The moment he finished, Olivia snatched the papers, checked them, and put them in her bag. She turned off the camera and gave the three of them one last sweeping glance. Your performance was terrible, but the ending is quite realistic. Jessica, you can have him. From now on, he's nothing but a coward. And Vince, you'd better pray I don't find out where you got that drug or your next suite will be a prison cell. She turned and walked to the door, not looking back at Mark's final, desperate plea. As far as she was concerned, he had ceased to exist the moment that door had locked the night before. At the threshold, she paused and looked at him one last time. Pack your things and get out of my house immediately. Your belongings, I've already had them thrown out onto the sidewalk. Don't let me see your face again, or I can't guarantee this secret stays a secret. The door slammed shut, leaving a tangled mess of depravity and ambition in its wake. Walking down the hotel corridor, the decisive click of her heels on the marble floor was a drumbeat of finality. The morning sun flooded the lobby. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the pure, clean air of freedom fill her lungs. The play was over, and now her own life was just beginning. After leaving the hotel, Olivia drove straight to her office. On the way, using a secure anonymous email account, she sent the full audio confession and the video evidence to the private inboxes of Mark's CEO and the entire board of directors. This wasn't just personal revenge. It was a matter of principle. A man with such a venomous character had no right to hold a position of power and trust. Less than 2 hours later, the dominoes began to fall. Mark was suspended indefinitely pending an internal investigation into gross moral misconduct and potential embezzlement. Jessica was fired, and somehow the humiliating photos from the hotel found their way to her conservative family, who promptly disowned her. Olivia went to see her father that evening. The old general sat in his study, his white hair seeming to tremble as she recounted the entire story and played the recording of the son-in-law he had once cherished. He was silent for a long time, his frail hands gripping the arms of his leather chair. The disappointment was a deep chasm in his wrinkled face. His lifetime of honor had almost been tarnished by a greedy, small-minded man. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said, his voice raspy. "I'm the one who brought him into our lives. I'm the one who helped him climb so high only for him to turn around and bite you." Olivia took her father's trembling hand. "It's not your fault, Dad. The fault lies in the darkness of the human heart. I'm a CID agent. If I can't protect myself and my own family, how can I protect anyone else? I'm proud of how this ended. Don't blame yourself." The general looked at his daughter, a flicker of immense pride in his old eyes. She hadn't crumbled. She had faced this storm with the fortitude of a soldier, using her intellect and training to expose the truth. Later, standing on her parents' balcony, Olivia felt a profound sense of relief, as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from her chest. 10 years of her life had been a trial by fire, but the freedom she had earned was worth the price. When she returned to her condo building, she saw Mark's pathetic figure standing by the entrance. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a rumpled shirt and jeans. His designer luggage and personal effects were strewn across the sidewalk like trash. The doorman under her orders refused to let him inside. Seeing her car, Mark ran toward it, his face gaunt and desperate. "Olivia, just one word. I lost my job, I have nowhere to go, you can't be this cruel." She didn't get out. She lowered the window just enough for her cold, clear voice to carry. "Kindness is a luxury you forfeited when you chose to be a criminal. What you're experiencing now is the finale of a show you directed yourself. Get your trash off my curb before I call sanitation to haul it away." She hit the gas, the car swerving around the man who fell to his knees beside the wreckage of his life. In the rearview mirror, she saw him sitting on the pavement, surrounded by the expensive clothes that were once his pride, now just a pile of garbage for passers-by to scorn. The battle was over. The Major had won an absolute victory on the battlefield of her own life. The next morning, Olivia was at her desk by 0630, her uniform crisp, the Major's oak leaf insignia gleaming on her shoulder. She buried herself in her work, leading a high-stakes investigation into a transnational drug ring. The real world was far more brutal than Mark's petty schemes. While he was plotting his cheap dramas, real criminals were out there armed and dangerous. Weeks turned into months. During a raid on a remote production lab, a bullet grazed her arm. The searing pain was a sharp reminder of her reality. She tackled the ringleader with a takedown maneuver, the motion identical to the one she'd used on Mark. But this felt different. This was justice. This was protecting people. Returning to the city, she stood before her bathroom mirror. looking at the new scar beside the old ones. They were marks of honor far more real than the invisible wounds Mark had inflicted. She smiled a genuine, radiant smile. She was a warrior complete on her own. One evening, leaving work late, she saw David, a quiet, stoic colleague from her team, waiting for her. He had always been there during the dangerous missions, a silent, steady presence. He handed her a container of hot soup. "Major, how's the arm I figured you hadn't eaten?" His concern was simple, real, and devoid of any of Mark's practiced charm. Olivia paused, looking into the sincere eyes of the man who had her back. She realized that even in a harsh world, there were pockets of warmth. "Thank you, David. You're too kind," she smiled, accepting the soup. A new chapter, a real one, was beginning. A year later, Olivia stood on a decorated stage, the silver oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel now pinned to her uniform. The promotion was a direct result of the successful drug bust. In the audience of her peers, she felt a quiet, solid peace. That afternoon, she walked through the same city park where, over a decade ago, Mark had promised her the world. She saw him. He was hauling crates of soda for a street vendor, his back bent, his face weathered and thin. He looked up and his eyes met hers. He froze a wave of shame washing over him. He saw her a decorated officer, confident and beautiful. He, a broken man doing manual labor. The contrast was a brutal public humiliation. He quickly turned away, hiding his face. Olivia watched him but felt no hatred, no satisfaction, only a distant clinical pity. The most profound revenge wasn't about causing pain. It was about living a life so full and brilliant that the one who betrayed you becomes an insignificant ghost. "Are you doing okay?" she asked, her voice calm. He flinched but didn't turn around, mumbling something incoherent before shuffling away into the shadows of the park like a wounded animal. Olivia watched him go, then continued her walk. A text message lit up her phone. It was David waiting to take her to dinner to celebrate her promotion. She smiled a genuine, easy smile and walked toward the park gates, her back straight, her future bright and entirely her own. She was no longer the woman from 10 years ago. She was a new creation forged in fire, strong and free. Her life in all its fierce and beautiful reality was just beginning.